I almost made it through. I almost made it through without clicking on the wrong thing, but I didn't. So this will be part two, but I'm almost done with the lecture, so hang in there. Utraquist Taborite's fine. Um, it wasn't really a Reformation. And that was known that the settlement of the schism and that the ending, in some ways, of conciliarism, culminating in Eugenius IV and his victory, didn't really deal with the issues. And in 1439, an anonymous treatise was written, the title The Reformation of the Emperor Sigismund. Now, this is one of your assigned readings. So you'll read this treatise. It became one of the most widespread treatises known dealing with Reformation. And there you see the urgency involved because it proclaims a prophecy. Now, Emperor Sigismund was dead and gone. We have no idea whether this really was his vision. So keep in mind there is a vision that is presented that is ascribed to Emperor Sigismund that he had, I think it was 1402. We have no idea if that was a real event or a real vision. And if it was a real vision and that Emperor Sigismund believed he had that vision, of course the historian cannot say, well, yes, he did or no, he didn't. That is almost irrelevant. But the point is, this treatise is spreading out there as this vision of divine revelation to the Emperor Sigismund for the reformation of society as a whole. Because it is very critical, this document of the Council Fathers. They said they had the opportunity to bring about a reformation and headed members, and they failed. They just, actually says they just showed their arse, which means they showed their ass to the idea of reformation. Mooning. I don't know if that's a thing anymore. It's a very graphic rebuke. That's what they did. I said, and then it goes on to say that we have earned the wrath of God. The wrath of God is upon us. The last hope we have is to bring about this reformation. And it goes through the various areas that need reformation, new reforming, reformation of. It includes the papacy, the College of Cardinals, priesthood, bishops too, I believe. And then it goes into secular aspects, the secular princes, tolls, taxes. All of society is dealt with. The secular, so to speak, as well as the religious, as well as the hierarchy. And then it ends with a prophecy that we need to do this. Why? Because a reformer is coming to establish reformation and to institute reformation from above. He will be called Frederick of the New Land. Now, and there's Landneuen, that translates as New Land. I don't know why Strauss didn't translate that name too, but he just left it as Landneuen. Frederick of the New Land. He will be priest and king after the order of Melchizedek. He will be fierce. So join with him. Be on his side. Be prepared and be on the lookout because he is coming. He's going to institute reformation from above. This is going to happen. Beware. Be ready because it's coming. God's wrath has been unleashed and it's coming. This treatise is important because it gets at the tenor of the urgency of reformation. From Huss's prophecy about the coming swan to the prophecy of Frederick of Landneuen of the New Land that was becoming an imposing reformation. It was the last hope for the church. Reformation was the last hope for the church and therefore the last hope for Christendom. And a reformer was coming. And there was a Frederick who would institute Reformation and be central to the Reformation that was going to be taking place, even if not quite the way as prophesied. But those prophecies were known. As we move on into the 16th century, we'll be talking about that later. Now, this whole urgency, these calls for reformation, failed. In some ways, too, that is the outcome of the Reformation of the Emperor Sigismund. The attempts failed. They had the opportunity. And the leaders of Christendom, ecclesiastical and secular just the princes and the kings, and ecclesiastical, the popes, archbishops, and bishops, they failed to bring it about. I've talked about the failed Reformation of the later Middle Ages in chapter 1 of my book. I refer to it as it having failed. And later on, in the last chapter of my book, Luther and the Reformation of the Later Middle Ages, I talk about how Luther's Reformation failed. And that failure thesis I'll be talking a lot more about later in terms of the 16th century and thereafter. But here it comes back to the idea of just because the Reformation of the later Middle Ages failed, does that mean it wasn't a Reformation? Does that mean it was simply reform? Were there reforms? Yes, there were reforms. Was there Reformation? No. So therefore we call it just, late medieval reforms leading to finally the Reformation. I think that is a misunderstanding. It is a confessional understanding, and it is an ahistorical understanding. If we were to look at the historical documents and the historical terminology and what we can discern about the historical mentality at the time, this was a period that Reformation was increasingly seen as absolutely necessary and as the last hope. It just wasn't affected. We see more of that in the next lecture. Another part of this late Reformation of the later Middle Ages and the urgency involved there when we talk about the observant movement. But that then is kind of part of this lecture, and the previous ones is all part of one kind of overarching thing or historical period development that is absolutely necessary for understanding historically what is going to be happening when we get to the 16th century and developments thereafter. So read the Reformation of the Emperor Sigismund, your first text analysis with Jordan's exposition of the Lord's Prayer, which too was being copied and used and during this period in the 15th century, just because he wrote it early on and pretty early. It's being copied. Gabriel Biel in the later 15th century is using it word for word, and on it goes. So that's all part of this overarching tapestry of the Reformation of the later Middle Ages. We'll see how it further developments from here on out. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.